Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video we're taking a first look at a brand new Pokemon in the world of Pokemon Go, Espathra. Now Espathra evolves from Flittle, which can be encountered through hatching 5-kilometer eggs as a part of the new event that just dropped today. Espathra is a pure Psychic type Pokemon, and for the moveset it's rocking Confusion, Psyshock, and Dazzling Gleam. So right off the bat, the moveset does look quite promising. Espathra is on the Glacier side of things, so it is going to be hitting pretty hard, but as a result, it's not going to be able to take hits particularly well. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in game number 1, we've got a perfect mirror lead, Tinkaton into Tinkaton. Now I have a very high-ranked Tinkaton, which means I will very frequently lose charge attack priority in the matchup. The good news is because I have a very high-ranked Tinkaton, I can always survive the Gigaton plus Bulldoze, so I feel very comfortable no-shielding the first charge attack. Their Gigaton lands, my Gigaton does get shielded, and I'm just going to farm up and go straight for Gigaton Hammer number 2. Now it's my opponent over-farming. It looks like they were anticipating me to catch, but I feel very comfortable just staying in, landing the damage, and now I'll go for the Bulldoze catch onto Feraligatr. My opponent wanted to Fairy Wind me into Bulldoze range, but getting that catch and not getting debuffed means that I should do very well in this normal Feraligatr mirror as my opponent switches in. Now, it's very unlikely my opponent's going to have an Espathra as the third, because obviously Espathra just released, so I'm trying to figure out what they could have in the back. Maybe some kind of flyer, or maybe a second water. My Feraligatr is barely able to hang on. Shout out to that Bulldoze not debuffing me earlier. We make the Hydro Cannon and take the knockout, and in the back, my opponent has Gourgeist. This is really not what I was hoping to see, as Espathra's Confusions are doing huge damage to the Gourgeist, but a Shadow Ball would absolutely destroy Espathra. I will put up the shield, they go for the Seed Bomb bait. I'm going to throw one Confusion and go for the Psyshock. My opponent is forced to undertap here, because if they try and go for good timing, I can outpace, so I just pivot into Tinkaton, and I'm able to catch what should hopefully be the Shadow Ball. It is. Tinkaton will get knocked out, I can bring back in Espathra, and I decide to throw 2 Confusions and the Psyshock. This should guarantee that I'm on track to make a Psyshock versus that Tinkaton. Tinkaton, I believe, had 6 Fairy Winds of Residual Energy, which means they just simply cannot outpace. They go for the Bulldoze. Bulldoze gets the debuff, but it's too little, too late. Espathra able to outpace, make the Psyshock, knock out the Tinkaton, and secure the Game 1 win. Hopping into game number 2, we pick up a pretty nice lead, Tinkaton into Shadow Celio. On paper, this should be a dominant lead win for Tinkaton, but in reality, Shadow Celio actually makes it very close. A lot of Shadow Celio teams are intentionally designed to be AB weak to the Tinkaton because they know even if they lead Celio into the Tinkaton, Celio at bare minimum will be able to get some very good damage onto the Tinkaton, and then Tinkaton can't really do much into their backline. I'm going to shield the first, no shield the second, but just off the Powder Snows and the Surfs, I've already almost lost 3/4 of my Tinkaton. I full send Gigaton once again. I go 2 for 2 full sending, and unfortunately both of them do get shielded. I decide to let this one go. My opponent does bait with the Body Slam. They save switch into Lickilicky, and I need to connect with Gigaton Hammer. I don't have a good answer to Lickilicky in the back, so I needed that damage to hopefully put it into Hydro Cannon range for my Feraligatr. I know that I can survive any one move here. My opponent will go for the Shadow Ball, so I'll throw 3 Shadow Claws and CMP tie Hydro Cannon to the Body Slam. I'm hoping that the Gigaton Hammer did enough, so this does take the knockout, and it does. They get KO'd, and back in comes the Shadow Celio. I just need whatever damage I can get onto the Celio, so I fire off Hydro Cannon. That's going to put them very, very low. I switch into the Tinkaton, and I'm able to get the catch. That is massive. I'm able to save the Feraligatr in case I need it for later. I send in Espathra, and Espathra snipes down with a Confusion. In the back, it's a Medicham, and this is a rare moment in which Espathra has a type advantage. I get to farm up, go for the Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam connects, Medicham gets shredded, and this game is over. Medicham fires off the Ice Punch. That does so much damage to Espathra. I no shield. I'm honestly not sure if Espathra can hold on here. Espathra does barely survive. We Confusion down the Medicham and get the win. We get the Dream lead in game number 3, Tinkaton into Guzzlord. My opponent safe switches into Feraligatr, and that's a definite weak spot of this team. I have no Pokemon on this team that wants to switch into a safe switch Feraligatr, so I fire off Gigaton Hammer. That connects for huge damage, and now I bring in my own Feraligatr. I can very comfortably survive a Hydro Cannon. I am slightly worried that if the second Hydro Cannon lands, then my opponent could potentially Shadow Claw me down. I don't have the greatest Feraligatr ever, so I will decide to put up the shield, and instead, just look to connect with the Ice Beam when my opponent sends back in the Guzzlord. So I fire off Ice Beam. Ice Beam is going to be no shielded. That does big damage. I'm going to go for the CMP tie with the Guzzlord, but my opponent actually doesn't throw on alignment. So throwing on alignment actually ends up being a misplay, because now, because of the Dragon Tail sneak, they do get a full farm down. I send in Tinkaton in the back. Oh no, it's Aegislash. And this is a Pokemon that I'm also ABA weak to. I'm ABA weak to Feraligatr, I'm ABA weak to the Aegislash, and I am in so much trouble. Psyshock actually does a decent amount of damage to Aegislash just because that's how high of attack stat Espathra has, but oh my goodness, I am definitely going to be losing this game. Aegislash can fire off Shadow Ball. I have to let the Espathra go. This Shadow Ball would probably knock out 2.5 Espathras. Shadow Ball shreds the Espathra. I send in Tinkaton, but they're already doubled up, so I'm forced to put up the shield. My opponent can just stay in here and win the game. They actually end up pivoting out, which I hoped for a moment gave me a potential win condition just because I get so much free energy in exchange for taking no damage. But I realize, unfortunately, I am going to be farming down this Guzzlord slightly too quickly. I think if I just don't shield my Feraligatr in the mid game, and I instead just exit very low, but having both shields intact, then Espathra could have actually won this endgame for me. Because Aegislash is in a very tough spot when both shields are up, but unfortunately, I didn't read the Aegislash in the back, and I am ABA weak to Aegislash. I try and double up on Bulldozes, I can't quite get there, and I just get swept by an Aegislash. That Pokemon is just too strong. We get a terrible lead in the next match, leading Tinkaton into Quagsire. I save switch into Feraligatr, and my opponent does not have Mud Bomb, as they don't throw right away, and that allows me to land a Hydro Cannon and importantly get my turn back. They farm up to a Stone Edge. I'm always okay with no shielding this, because my opponent is already basically in Bulldoze range, and now they send out Hakamo-o. This is not a Pokemon I was expecting to see whatsoever. Hakamo-o, I don't know if they can survive this. They put up the shield, which I'm very happy about, because what is Hakamo-o going to do into a Tinkaton? My opponent sees that I get one turn bring in and they take advantage, firing off the Brick Break. That is really not ideal. I try and make a Gigaton Hammer, but they're just going to fire off their Brick Break right before I'm able to get there. And surprisingly, Hakamo-o did do a decent amount of damage. In the back, it's another Aegislash, but this time, I can fire off a Bulldoze, and I still have 2 Protect Shields to work with. Unfortunately, the 50-50 does not go in my favor. I don't get the debuff, but up 2 shields, Espathra should be able to make life very, very uncomfortable for this Aegislash. I fire off the Psyshock. I just want damage onto this Pokemon. Aegislash can start to fire off Shadow Balls, but now they're going to be in the Blade form, and these confusions are going to start to shred. Having 2 shields against Aegislash is so vitally important, because they love nothing more than farming up to the back-to-back. So I double shield Espathra, another confusion will go through, they pivot into Quagsire, but before Quagsire is able to make a move, I already have the Psyshock loaded. Psyshock is going to be no shielded, Quagsire gets KO'd. My opponent still has the Hakamo-o in the back, but that's really not going to appreciate confusions either. They bring in the Aegislash, but Aegislash doesn't have any residual energy. They need to try and outpace the Espathra, but they're not going to be able to. Espathra is going to make the Psyshock, and Espathra will get the knockout onto the Aegislash. Psyshock will take the KO. Back in comes Hakamo-o. Hakamo-o barely able to hang on and make a last-second charge attack. Can Espathra survive? They go for the Rock Tomb. Espathra survives, gets the confusion down, and Espathra gets the endgame sweep. Unfortunately, we see a pretty massive core breaker on the lead in the next match as I lead Tinkaton into Unova Stunfisk. Part of the reason why Unova Stunfisk, despite the rework to Mud Bomb, has remained so strong in the meta is due to situations like this. Tinkaton plus Water is insanely strong, and Stunfisk does a great job of breaking that core. Mud Bomb will hit for big damage. The fact that I'm staying in, my opponent is going to know that I'm very, very soft to Stunfisk. They actually end up putting up a shield, but the Bulldoze debuffs. Even though I guess they wanted to try and preserve that Stunfisk, shielding a Bulldoze that then debuffs puts them in a really rough spot. They go for the Discharge bait, but a Discharge will not knock me out, so it doesn't really end up saving them any energy, and now I'm able to land a Bulldoze on the charge attack priority tie. Bulldoze does get them very, very low. They Discharge, that will set up a pretty big farm down, and I'm going to send in Espathra. Espathra is going to have to take a Mud Bomb, and knowing Espathra, that's probably going to do like 60% of its HP. Mud Bomb lands, Espathra gets shredded. In the back is Bug Bite Fortress, and this is bad. I send in Feraligatr. They have Gourgeist in the back, and I realize I don't have enough energy to make it to a Hydro Cannon plus an Ice Beam. I have one opportunity to stay alive in this game, and that's by overfarming to the max and full sending the Ice Beam. Ice Beam does land, picking up the knockout, but then I realize I don't have enough residual. I'm going to get outpaced here by the Fortress. Hydro Cannon would basically take the knockout from this range if it lands, but they're going to make the Rock Tomb first. So I farm up, switch into Espathra, and get the game-winning catch. My opponent undercharges the Rock Tomb, but that just lets me have a Psyshock. I had the Psyshock banked. The Psyshock, it's not going to do much, Well, I was going to say it wasn't going to do much, but it's an Espathra. Every charge attack from Espathra does entirely too much damage. Now I'm able to get the Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon, I probably would have needed some Shadow Claws after without the Psyshock, but with the Psyshock, that is definitely going to be a win. We get the Dream lead in the next match, leading Tinkaton into Cradily. My opponent safe switches into Shadow Feraligatr, and this time I'm better prepared. I fire off the Bulldoze and then switch in my own. I think this is just the strictly better way to handle a Feraligatr safe switch, get a little bit of chip on it, so that way the matchup's a lot cleaner for my Feraligatr, and as well, I can fish for a debuff. I didn't get the debuff this time, but either way, I should still be in a position where I can always guarantee switch advantage. I'm very low on my Feraligatr, so I don't know if I have enough in the tank to make an Ice Beam into that Cradily, but I'm just going to try and play it by ear, see how much damage the assets are doing, and determine whether I decide to go for it. They bring in the Cradily. These assets are not doing much. I'm going to full commit, and it just knocks out, meaning that I get basically no damage onto the Cradily. That was a pretty big misplay by me, but the good news is I have a very strong matchup with Tinkaton into Cradily. I'm just going to keep farming. Cradily banks energy. In the back is Stunfisk, and this is not where Espathra wants to be. Espathra is really going to struggle in neutral matchups just because it is so incredibly frail. My opponent does go for a Mud Bomb, which is a little bit of good fortune for me. Double Discharge would knock out because of how frail Espathra is, but the Psyshock does do some pretty considerable damage. I'm going to be shielding up Espathra, firing off the Psyshock as soon as I get there, and this will guarantee the final shield or the knockout. Either way, I should be in a winning position. They end up letting it go. They send in Cradily just to be met instantly with Gigaton Hammer. I'm not going to bait. It feels like the only lose con. Gigaton takes the one-hit KO, and that's a good game. The final two games were played in the Preview Cup, so it is going to look quite a bit different. I was pretty encouraged by what I saw early days from the Preview Cup, but after playing some games today, I really feel like we haven't seen meaningful progress in a while, and that does worry me quite a bit. It still feels very, very clunky, and I know it's a work in progress, but I would love to see progress on this game mode quite a bit faster. My opponent makes a really, really nice bait call there. No show to the Bulldoze, forcing out almost all my energy. They get debuffs again. I try and snipe with the Feraligatr, but they hang on, and I'm forced to put up a shield. So now it's shield parity. My opponent can safely bring in Lickilicky, and this is a matchup where Feraligatr struggles. The extra bulk on the non-Shadow Feraligatr shines in a lot of matchups, but its inability to two-shot Lickilicky is definitely to its detriment. Because I'll be able to get the Lickilicky very, very low, but unfortunately, I can't really do much more than that because I can never Shadow Claw it down. My opponent's going to undertap, anticipating that I would go for one Shadow Claw in the catch, which was my plan, and they end up undertapping twice. So I really need a Espathra to be able to win the endgame, and considering they were weak to Psychic at the start, I don't know if that's a guarantee. In the back, it's going to be Stunfisk, and this probably looks like a losing endgame to me. I genuinely don't know what does more here, Psyshock or Dazzling Gleam. Last time in this matchup, I went for the Psyshock. This time, I'm going to go for the Dazzling Gleam. Hoping the Dazzling Gleam is going to do more. Dazzling Gleam does do some pretty monster damage, but my opponent's just going to continue to spam out these discharges. This is going to be a very tricky endgame because I'm going to have to rely on Fairy Winds to try and put them at 1 HP. So I switch in. I switch back in the Espathra, and I have to hope they're at exactly 1 HP. If they are, they'll get knocked out through the shield. They shield, but it wasn't 1 HP. I tried to make it as close as I could, but we're unable to do so. Espathra gets knocked out, and we will lose the game. Hopping to the final match, and we get a terrible lead as Tinkaton leads into Quagsire once again. I save switch into my Feraligatr. This time my opponent will throw on 5 so I don't get my turn back. But they don't have Mud Bomb. They instead just go for an Aqua Tail and then send in Shadow Empoleon. And at this point, I'm very worried that this is the Triple Water team. If it's the Triple Water team, then my Tinkaton is going to have basically no play in this game. However, the Feraligatr should be very strong, so I decide that I'm going to be heavily investing resources into the Feraligatr. The unfortunate news for me is that Hydro Cannon will miss the knockout onto the Empoleon, so my opponent should always be no-shielding here, and they do. That's good situational awareness from my opponent, recognizing that this is the shielding scenario where they can gain an advantage, so they're going to be no-shielding instead of double-shielding and still losing switch. My opponent reveals Togekiss in the back as their final Pokemon, and I'm going for broke. I'm full sending the Ice Beam. Ice Beam lands, big damage, in comes Espathra, they transfer the confusion and send back in the Quagsire. Quagsire is immediately under threat from Espathra's Psyshock. Psyshock would pick up the knockout, and they're forced to put up the shield. If they have Stone Edge, it will probably take the knockout, but I should survive an Aqua Tail. They go for the Aqua Tail. That does so much damage onto Espathra. The thing I have to watch for in this game is going to be that Togekiss switch in. They do have an Aura Sphere loaded. I send in the Tinkaton. I'm just going to look to farm up. They fire off energy, and considering they didn't throw a mud bomb at Feraligatr, I'm pretty confident they do not have it. That's gonna land, in comes the Togekiss, and we get the game-winning catch onto Feraligatr. Aura Sphere does not land onto its intended target. In comes Tinkaton, opponent sees the writing on the wall, and concedes the match. Even though I did have some pretty fun games with Espathra, including the one where Espathra was able to knock out Aegislash, I do think this is a very flawed Pokemon upon release. When you're dealing with glassier Pokemon in that 1600 stat product range, ideally you want to have a very useful secondary defensive subtyping. Because the goal, if you're a very glassy Pokemon, you want to be in as many type advantage matchups as possible, where your defensive typing allows you to feel like you're a bit bulkier. Because a lot of these glassy Pokemon just get completely overrun in neutral matchups. Like we saw how bad that Espathra Stunfisk matchup was, just because you're a Mono Psychic. Mono Psychic by itself is not going to have a lot of very valuable defensive resistances, and it feels like overall in the meta, being a Psychic typing, especially in a meta where Bug Bite Fortress is as strong as it is, frequently ends up being more of a hindrance than a help, especially with Pokemon like Feraligatr lurking. So, Espathra is a Pokemon that does have a very strong moveset. Espathra, I don't believe I mentioned it at the start, but Espathra can also learn Peck. Now, unfortunately, it would not get same type attack bonus on Peck, because despite the fact that it's very clearly an Ostrich Pokemon, it's somehow a pure Psychic instead of a Psychic Flying. But overall, I feel like they did do this Pokemon some pretty nice justice with the moves that it learns. It's just in a really tough spot of being a glassy Psychic type. Now, there is an upcoming meta, the North American International Championships meta in early June, where Psychic types do set the center stage. And that's where Espathra, if it's going to see any play whatsoever, it would probably be in that North American International Championships Limited meta. However, I don't honestly think that it would have a ton of play there either, just because there are tankier Psychic types and there are Psychic types with better coverage than Espathra, so it could potentially be some fun playable spice in that meta. But overall, I think this Pokemon, at least as of the current moment, is more of a Dex entry than anything, even with the pretty good moveset that it was given. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.